remember shouting to my father at 15, I want to be a writer. And I think the lie that I was selling to my parents at the time was that I wanted to do medicine. And when I finished matric, I knew that I didn't want to be a doctor. So I decided to study law because I thought I could sneak in some literature courses. I've always loved literature. I've always loved books. I've kept a journal I kept my first journal at the age of 8, you know. But I think it became a real part of my life as a teenager. And I was only brave enough to call myself a poet at around 20, 21. And that was at the time when I discovered the Johannesburg underground art scene, which was really vibrant, you know. It was live music and hip hop and spoken word and really exciting and dynamic and fresh. And I fell in love with spoken word. I felt like the first time I saw someone stand on stage and open up, you know, a journal and read their poem, I thought this is the most bold, brave, naked, vulnerable thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I was absolutely blown away. And I started chasing those spaces, chasing opportunities to do that. And that was it. 12 years later, here I am.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Alexander Theatre, and more importantly, welcome to Poetry Africa. In my humble opinion, Poetry Africa is the premier South African poetry festival. It's been running for 15 years. It takes place in Durban annually. Over the course of a week, poets from all around the world, with a very specific bias towards poets from the African continent and South Africa, gather in Durban and take the city by storm. There are poetry workshops in schools and in museums and in prisons, and every evening there is a poetry reading at the Elizabeth Snedden Theatre at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Who was the first person that I saw on stage? I don't remember, and I've never seen that girl again. You know, if I saw her again, I would know who she was. I don't remember her name, but I remember that she had one of those, you know, those black and white school books, those black and white notebooks with the red binder? Yeah, the Croxley notebooks, yeah. And that was the same one that I used as a notebook because, you know, that was the stationery that I got from school. And she opened up her Croxley and did this incredible poem at Jungle Connection in Doornfontein in 2000. And I remember very clearly thinking that if she can do this, I can do it too, you know? And there were a number of women on the scene, I think, that gave me that kind of confidence. Simpiwe Dana was on the scene as a singer. She had just moved up from the Eastern Cape. There was a beautiful poet, Samantha Martins, who was very active in a poetry collective called Perm that I was a part of back then. She also gave me a lot of confidence, as did a young woman named Palesa Shongwe. And Karabo Kholeng also, who now writes for City Press and is on SAFM. She was also a poet, very vibrant in that scene. So there were a lot of us kind of finding our voices and helping each other along, you know, because it was and it still is a kind of boys' world, you know. And part of the reason why we formed Fearless Sister was because we got tired of being lumped as, you know, there's these women poets. You know, they would do corny things like have a woman's poetry night or have a sister set, you know, at the end of the night when everybody's drunk, you know, at like 11, 12 o'clock when nobody wants to pay attention. So part of the reason why we formed Fearless Sister, myself, Maisha Jenkins, Napo Mashiane, and Ziki Mazwai, was because I guess we had experienced the scene from different sides and from different angles, and we had the same issues, and we just said, you know, why don't we create our own platform? Why don't we create our own show? And we didn't realize how much of a huge response we were going to get. We didn't realize also on a practical level that, you know, that it's not easy, but possible, you know. When we wanted to put a venue together, we wanted to get a venue, so we spoke to Bra Hot Sticks at Kippies at the time, and Hot Sticks was like, okay, I'll give you the door, you guys just give me the bar and it's fine. We're like, wow, that's easy. And then we had to go and organize our own PA system. Then we had to do marketing. Then we spoke to Gail Smith. Gail Smith is a very good friend of Maisha's. So she was really instrumental in teaching us about how to get the media to be aware of who we are. The first time we did a press release, she taught us what to do. She taught us how to put our pictures together, how to put our bios together. She said the media wants to be fed, so you decide how you want to position yourself within the media. And that, I mean, I was 23 years old at the time, but that headspace, that information helped me map out my career. That's always how that's how I've engaged with the media ever since. And even Fearless Sister, being able to create a platform allowed me to walk into the arts and into media and entertainment with this understanding that I have the right to own what I do. I can create platforms for myself too, and this is my stuff. This is my world, and I didn't realize at the time, I mean, now I see how huge and radical that is, but I didn't realize at the time that that was a remarkable shift from the way that artists had always done things in this country, So, I mean, we were very, very lucky, and I know in my heart that I would not be where I am were it not for the support of women in this creative field.
South Africa, you do not have a name. Things that go unnamed wander through the world, not knowing where to look or where to go. In Africa, names are asked for, prayed for. Blood is spilled in the name of naming. Warm red liquid seeping into dust fills the dead with life. Our names are the dead speaking. South Africa, can you hear the song of the dead? The rush of blood spilling daily in your breast. We kill each other for your nameless name's sake, to appease the hungry ghosts who keep asking, where do we look? Where do we go? The dead know more of living than we, the living, did.
I think we were incredibly lucky to find each other. It was a combination of factors. I think post 1994, everybody had this question around, what's going to happen to struggle literature? What are black writers going to write about? What are people going to talk about now that they're not reacting to apartheid? Which is incredibly problematic to begin with. But I think the fact that there wasn't this big monolithic struggle hanging over our heads anymore, allowed for a new kind of voice to emerge in the country. And because South Africa was and still is grappling with figuring out what its national identity is, it became really critical for artists, to be on the front line of engaging with those kinds of questions. I also think that South Africa struggles with an emotional vocabulary. We don't know how to name our feelings as a society. It's either complete euphoria or it's absolute violence and rage. And these kind of subtle emotions in between. Confusion, nervousness, fear. All these other layers of feelings. We struggle to identify. But I think because of the way that women are socialized, maybe it's also just a natural gift, a part of our femininity. Women have access to that emotional vocabulary, more than men do. So part of what we've been able to bring to this discourse around nation building, understanding what this thing called South Africa is bringing an emotional vocabulary. What was so exciting about sharing my work with people like Maisha, with people like Napo, with people like Makhosazana Qaba, with people like Natalia or Philippa, was the fact that I realized that I'm not alone. We were all writing about the same things. We were writing about gender, we were writing about identity, about spirituality, about politics, about love, and I realized that, my worldview is it's not this isolated thing. I'm not an island. Everything that I'm going through, somebody else is going through it, but we all have our own unique ways of expressing it. That was fundamentally what the connection was, and I think over the years, it's been an important connection for me to maintain as an artist, because it also pushes me and forces me to be productive, In the last decade, more black women have published books of poetry than ever before in history in this country. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of us come from the same community and are connected to each other, you know. And I think going forward, even when people start to unpack what this particular period in our history has been about, you know, at least in terms of literature, you know, they're going to look at us in the same context. We're creating a context for each other, you know? So that thing that often happens to black writers or to black female writers or to women writers, where you kind of get positioned in this whole, you know, this Lone Ranger thing happens to people. They isolate you and they turn you into a freak, or, you know, they elevate you, you know, which is another kind of freakdom, you know? But it's important for us to maintain a connection with each other, because for as long as we're a part of this community, our work will always have to be engaged with in this particular context, you know? And that, like, on a political level, on a historical level, that's really important. It's fundamental.
South Africa, your aspirations asphyxiate me. I die each day just to live free. Bonded to the lie that I could own any land, or that you could ever build a fence that could hold all of me. The dead have us by the collar. The dead squeeze themselves into our dreams. You think that you belong to yourself. The dead are using your eyes to see. We dress our wounds with costumes like designer aids and branded poverty. Tourists gorge their tears on raw sewage, then drive 10 minutes to sip chai tea. Our corpses are clothed in contradictions. We fashion fictions to feed free market afflictions. We are dancing to a dead rhythm while the dead wait for us to see ourselves in them. South Africa, the dead do not die. They wait for you to stop being afraid, to hear the voices that know where to go and what to do, to sit with these silences and give them names. Johannesburg, I will never forget that a black and white audience screamed nationalization. There goes the Juju's running through this theater like this. It's like this.
There is definitely a problem with mainstream literary, you know, South Africa with the scene. It's still very parochial, it's still very racist, it's still white supremacist, it's still very much old guard, you know, with few rare exceptions kind of trickling in, but by and large, it is what it is, it's what it's always been. I started performing because that was the platform that was available to me as a writer. You know, I wasn't even thinking about it. It just happened naturally because that was how I was exposed to it, you know. And I think that's by default. That's what ends up happening to a lot of poets, you know, especially to black female poets that have come up in this scene, you know, and the men too, but because we're speaking specifically about women, you know, the performance is kind of by default, you know, the avenue that people have to get their work out there. It's a blessing and it's a curse, you know. Being a performer, being on stage automatically gives you a certain level of visibility, you know, and it gives your work a different kind of accessibility, which is great. It gives it a mainstream accessibility, which is fantastic. And poetry lends itself to that, you know. It's bite-sized, you can package it in different ways, it works for a performance platform. But the real longevity of a writer is in publishing. It's important to get your work in books. That's where it's going to live forever, you know. And that's been a challenge for us. I personally made the decision to publish my first book with a mainstream publisher and to self-publish my second book. And to be very honest with you, you know, neither is really better. You know, you gain some things, you lose some things. Self-publishing, you have more control, but you also have more responsibilities, you know. So neither world is really easy. And I'm lucky because at least that world is receptive to me. If I want to publish a book in mainstream South African, with a mainstream South African publisher, I'll get one. But I can't say that that's true of every single one of the writers in my scene. And that is an indictment on it's an indictment of the racism that's inherent in South African publishing. For somebody like Napo Mashiane, who is a household name in South Africa. She's been on TV. She's been a Mail and Guardian, top 200 youth to have lunch with. She's visible and she's prolific and she's created a lot of plays and she's out there. But the South African literary world is not scrambling after her to publish her. That's problematic. In the long run, I don't know if it's going to be a blessing or a curse for us. I think by default, it's forcing us a lot of us have had to produce our own work, which maybe in the long run will be better for us, in terms of control. When we are big old grannies, we'll be able to look at all of the stuff that we really own. But in the short term, it's very difficult. Financially, it's incredibly difficult. You're always reinventing the wheel. You always have to worry about how am I going to get my stuff distributed? How am I going to, do the marketing? All the marketing is always on your shoulders by yourself, and all of that, it has a financial cost as well. You've got to pay for it. And some of us are trying to earn a living, off of our art. Some of us have full-time jobs, but again, even that, neither road really is easy or simple. So I think we find ourselves in a position where I know that what we are building is something that is going to benefit a lot of people in the long run. When I'm an old granny sitting in my chair overlooking the ocean, I know that I'm going to build something that a lot of people will see and appreciate and be able to benefit from in terms of finding their own voices. But right now, we have to pay for that, and that's hard. That's really, really hard.
This is the time when you can become the greatest substance of your dreams, unless you live in a shack and don't speak English and don't know what this poem means. Tell me how it's possible for people who walk on gold to not know how to read. Tell me how publishers who will never taste our tongues can comprehend the words that our people need, because we have never been scared of stories. The ones who uttered the very first. The ones who hand them to our children, calling the rivers of their self-worth. The ones who will write a narrative in the air, but who dare not call the air a page.
These kinds of publishing houses that specifically target women, they come up, and it's also kind of problematic because they don't last, Even Ocean, that published my first book, In a Ribbon of Rhythm, was an imprint of Strake, and they also had a very deliberate agenda to publish women, to publish African women. Zuki Swavaner, who's also kind of a member of our community, she's fantastic. She published her first book with Ocean. So now, Ocean now has it's no more. Now we have Mujaji Books. Mujaji Books has published Philippa. My worry about these kinds of publishing houses is around longevity. Why don't they stick around? And I also kind of worry about why we as a community, as a literary community, struggle to create community with these publishing houses. We're kind of vaguely aware that these people exist in the distance, but I'm not in my own self, in my own spirit, I don't feel the sense of urgency to create community with Mujaji Books in the same way that I feel the sense of urgency to create community with a young writer, a young black female writer who's coming up, And maybe that's a problem. Maybe they need to do a better job at coming out to find us and to support these communities, to support our community of writers.
I wore you today like a raggedy coat for the feel of how warm it used to be. I wore you beneath the tattered veil of night, far from the glare of stars or eyes. I wore you until touch reduced to the wetness of crumpled notes left in my tiny hand. I wear your scent into day, but I have never tasted your kiss.
I would think that for a publishing house like Mujaji Books, or like an Ocean, or like whatever, other incarnation of this thing is going to come up again in the future, because they keep coming, right? I think for them to last, they have to recognize that we are sitting on something that is going to be a gold field in the future, you know, and it's happening now, and it's been happening. If this was a fly-by-night thing, it wouldn't have lasted a decade, you know. We're still going to be publishing books in decades to come, you know. So I mean, to me it makes practical sense. If I wanted to start a publishing house that's going to specifically be geared towards women in South Africa, I would look at what women are writing about and what women are naturally gravitating towards in South Africa right now. You know, we are gigging, we're working, we're so relevant, we're out there, we're visible.
Fine black ash slips out of the hand like stories dancing on air, leaving stains on my nails and fingertips. Death's imprint has altered me. After the rains, green shoots pierce through smoky gray skin.
I believe firmly that publishing it's a collective decision. I would never, I would never be so arrogant to say that this is my collection of poems and I deem it ready for consumption. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to myself. I wouldn't do that to my audience. I get that, but I don't think that the literary establishment has to be the collective that deems it worthy.
I've walked through the lives of individuals whose eyes I've never known. I've been to cities and villages and countrysides whose skies to me have never been shown. It was in this solitary cell that my greatest gift was honed. I saw that my mind was just a shell and its abyss simply a hole. And the hell of a heaving, heavy heart is still my friend. Every story has its place, and history never ends. The writer is a visionary, an architect, a godchild at play on a canvas of memories. She lies naked between the covers, her own lover, her own worst enemy. Navigating between these extremes, she is both the judge and the judged, the vile, despised, and attacked, the unashamedly beloved, the ever-listening friend who will tell your business when you're not in sight. She pulls the mind's commotion out of stillness in the cavern of the night. And South Africa is a fractured mirror, a paradox of schizophrenic selves who don't talk to one another. Race is a farce because when the lights are off, everybody's fucked.